What's good, y'all? Welcome back to Believe Mommy Heat, brought to you by Living Network. As always, I'm your host, Anthony DiNardo. And as fast as I just did that intro, is as fast as I saw the Heat's chances of not running it back fly out the window over this past week. But before we get into that, I just want to say that I am on the audio-only side of things, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. So if you're listening on those platforms, go ahead and leave a 5-star review. Maybe a nice comment. That stuff does help me out a lot. But I also am on the YouTube side. If you want to see the video, just search Anthony DiNardo. And if you are over here, hit the like button. But most importantly, hit subscribe, because I'm less than 40 subs away from 5,000, y'all. So if you are on the audio side, come over to the YouTube too. Hit that button. Help me reach that nice milestone there. But it's been a great week. I mean, for me, not necessarily the Miami Heat. I got a couple DeMar DeRozan videos out. That stuff's irrelevant now. I got Kel'el out. I said, hey, the market's drying up. Maybe the Heat can re-sign Kel'el for cheap. We get to keep our boy. That obviously didn't happen. We got some nice summer league ball yesterday in which the Heat got killed. But there was some positives, I guess. But we'll be getting to all that stuff, and timestamps will be down below if you want to jump around to a certain topic. Now, for context, I am recording this at 9:30 a.m. on July 7th. So it's in between the first and second summer league game for the Heat. So we'll see what happens as they take on, I think, the Kings today in their second summer league game. But I want to start this podcast by talking about Kel'el as he signs with the 76ers for 4 years, $32 million. Now, I kind of want to give y'all a little bit of a timeline of how his free agency has gone, because for him, it hasn't been a good one. Now, I should put this into context. He's a guy that went undrafted. He was only in the NBA because J. Cole, the rapper, Jermaine Cole, shout out to RDC World, but Jermaine Cole is the one that discovered him. And he called up his boy Caron Butler on the Miami Heat and said, hey, you got to check out this kid Kel'el. He is a hooper, because they used to play together in some private runs and stuff. And sure enough, Kel'el dominated the practices. They signed him to, I think, a two-way, and then he very quickly made the full roster. So to go from that to making $32 million over the course of 4 years, it's a huge dub in life for Kel'el. Really, really is. So I want to put some perspective into that. But it does sound like he or his agent did cost himself a ton of money, because that $32 million over 4 years comes to an average of $8 million per year. And what has been widely reported as the Miami Heat's offer was $65 million over 5 years, which comes to $13 million a year. So he's getting an average of $5 million less per year by going to Philly. Now, the reason this all kind of got messed up is because technically what had to happen for Kel'el to get that money from the Heat is he would have had to opt into his next season with the Heat, in which he would have only got $7.1 million. So next season, he would have got about $1 million less than what he's going to get from Philly. But if Kel'el opted into that deal with the Heat, they were going to sign him to a 4-year, $58 million extension, meaning that after next season, he would have got almost $15 million a year. So going from $8 million a year to $15 million a year, or going from potentially, he could have had 15 and now he's at $8 million with the 76ers. Obviously, he cost himself a ton of money. And again, once he opted out, there was no going back for the Heat. Barry Jackson was even reporting, too, of some he said there were intense negotiations between the Heat and Kel'el, because the Heat are saying, hey, we're giving you $14.5 million a year. Like, that's what his market is. Like, we are able to give it to you. And apparently, Caleb's agent was like, no, we can get close to 20. And the Heat were dumbfounded. Those are the words that Barry Jackson used, who does get his information from inside the organization. And apparently, the agent for Kel'el said, no, that's not good enough. We're going to explore the market. Kel'el sat in free agency 1 week, 2 weeks. The market's drying up. And all that was really left was that cap space that the 76ers had. So he had no other options there. And I posted a video about the Kel'el news yesterday. And I got a couple of comments saying, oh, it's not the agent's fault. It's Kel'el's fault. He's the one that decided to opt out. Guys, I promise you, that's not how it works. Kel'el, as a guy who's coming up on his first chance to get a payday, is obviously going to go where he can get the most bread. That's what everyone does when their first contract, like when they're up for their first big contract, they go to get the bread, as they should. So what you do is you ask your agent, what is my market? That's the agent's job, to know your market. So for his agent to tell him, no, $15 million is not good enough, Kel'el has no choice but to believe it. And apparently it's an experienced agent too. He was a Kevin Garnett's agent back in the day. We know that boy got a bag once upon a time. Now, they did say his agent doesn't currently have as many agents, but 2 of them is the Martin twins. And it sounds like he might have 2 less agents after this, because if I'm Caleb Martin, I have to fire my agent because he truly, truly did do a disservice. Another thing I saw over the last 24 hours is, Caleb just didn't want to be with the Miami Heat. That's why he took less money. Stop acting like he went for the money. He wanted to win a championship. First off, I've seen comments like that. They've literally said Caleb went to the 76ers because he wanted to win a championship. That's why he left the Heat. So he went to the team that hasn't been out of the second round in a decade. I'm sure way longer than a decade, truthfully, but hasn't been out of the second round in forever, and Joel Embiid's entire tenure. So he leaves the Miami Heat, who have been to 2 NBA Finals in the last 5 years. Went to the NBA Finals with him. Went to the Conference Finals with him. That's obviously BS. And if you've been watching Caleb for any amount of time over these last few seasons, you know that his heart was with this Miami Heat team, the team that gave him a chance. You know he wanted to stay. There's no way he wanted to leave, and it sucks that he not only has to go to Philadelphia, he has to do it for a lot less money. Now, I am curious, though. I mean, he is at the $8 million right now. The Heat, $8 million a season. The Heat are about 5.5 below the second apron. If the Heat could have cleared up just a little bit of space, maybe they would have been able to resign him for that $8 million. But it doesn't sound like the Heat are able to do any trades here. It sounds like really nobody wants our assets. The whole Tyler Herro thing, it really seems like he's a negative asset at this point. And that's been something I've been saying for a long time. I was hoping some of these bad teams would be more interested in the younger guy that could score, but it doesn't look like it. I will get into that a little bit when we start talking about DeMar. I would just want to say with the Caleb thing, though, I think the most common sentiment that I saw from Heat fans is we are glad the Heat tried. It's not like they gave him a lowball offer. They didn't disrespect him. But at the end of the day, I think it's a good thing that Caleb declined, because then we'd be tied into Caleb Martin for quite a bit of money over the next few seasons. And I do agree with that sentiment, right? Because obviously $15 million a year is a lot. You'd essentially have your entire cap space for the next, couple seasons tied into Caleb Martin, Terry Rozier, Duncan Robinson, Jimmy, and Bam. Is that team good enough to win a championship? Well, they haven't thus far. Well, I know Terry was hurt last year, but still, is that team good enough to win it all? Likely not. You would like to see some better pieces. So I do think it's a good thing that that Caleb did not take that money. That part I agree with, because we can't sit here and say, Pat, don't run it back. Please, Pat, we don't want to see you run it back, shake things up, and then also be mad that they re-signed Caleb Martin for a ton of money. You know what I mean? Because then if you re-sign Caleb for that money, that's your roster for the time being. I mean, you could say, this whole thing about tradable contracts. If you get Caleb, you don't lose him for nothing. You have the potential to trade him. Remember, we signed Dwayne Dedmon a couple years ago, more than we thought he was worth. But it was a tradable contract. We had to attach a second-round pick to get rid of him. 2016, we signed James Johnson. We signed Dion Waiters. We signed the rest of that squad. We have tradable contracts. The Heat had to attach assets to move off those guys, and that's really why we sit here today. That was the start of everything. That was why the Heat have no assets today, because they really messed themselves up in that situation. And truthfully, I think the Heat signed all those guys to those massive deals because they had just let Dwayne Wade walk recently. They said, hey, we need to rebuild our image of a team that cares about its players. And the Heat finished that season prior to signing those guys 30-11. We know the deal. So they said, you know what? Maybe this team has some potential. They were tricked into thinking that team was actually good. And they gave those guys a bunch of long-term money to say, hey, look, we take care of our guys. And obviously that screwed everything up. I really think that was the worst decision this franchise has ever had, is that 2016 offseason. Because I think it's still affecting them today. Because they don't have first-round picks now because of they had to attach them to get rid of guys back then. And that's a huge reason they can't improve the roster right now. So, although I am sad to lose Caleb, I do think it was the right move to not run it back with him. Because, Heat fans, you lost him for nothing. There's a lot of that talk too. You lost Tim for nothing. You lost Gabe for nothing. Max Strus ended up being a sign and trade. So, you did get a second-round pick for him. But you lost Kendrick Nunn for nothing. And I will say this, because hindsight is always 20/20. And I didn't like the discourse I saw on Twitter saying, now you're mad we didn't trade Caleb when a month ago you wanted to keep Caleb? Yes, that's how hindsight works. People are allowed to be wrong. People are allowed to make mistakes. Now, I'm not going to say I wanted to keep Caleb at the trade deadline last season. I was cool either way. But for the people that did want to keep Caleb, and now that they're mad they didn't trade him, that's fine. You're allowed to be wrong, have an opinion. That's what this is all about. I didn't like to see that discourse on Twitter, people making fun of other people. Like, oh, how you going to say this now? That's not what you said 2 months ago. That's BS. Anyways, I feel like I'm going in circles there just because it gets me so upset. Like, especially as a guy in this content creation thing, I make opinions all the time. Most of the time, I'm wrong. And if I admit it in hindsight, don't act. Why am I still talking about this? Y'all get what I'm trying to say. Anyways, what I will say in complete hindsight is not trading Max and Gabe in 2023, I do think was the right move because those guys were critical components in helping us reach the NBA Finals. And I think making the finals is way more important than a couple of second-round picks you would have got for Gabe and Max. Because you ended up getting, one for Max anyways. That was obviously a signing trade. The Spurs took on some assets from Cleveland into their salary cap space. And then the Heat got a second-round pick for Max. Why couldn't the Spurs help us facilitate a 3-team signing trade for DeMar now? I don't know. Anyways, but making the finals is way more valuable because although they didn't win it, I'm not saying, oh, at least they made it. No. This Heat team has different standards. Championship or bust. There's winning and there's misery. And so far, Jimmy Butler's tenure with the Heat has been a failure because the goal has been to win a championship, and they have not done that, so therefore they have failed to achieve their goal. But making the finals is still valuable because it shows these other free agents that, hey, we are capable of putting together a contender. Maybe you're enough to get us over the top. So maybe a guy like Lauri Markkanen wants to get traded and says, hey, you know what? I want to win a chip. Now, he's younger, so he probably wants his money. But, well, I was going to say the same about DeMar. But, again, he didn't have money either. And it sounded like DeMar wanted money. But maybe the next free agent says, hey, I'm deciding between a couple of teams. Let me, I think that's kind of what we've seen, We've seen us be on Dame's list. We've seen us be on Bradley Beal's list. We've seen us be on KD's list. Those are guys that are older and probably want to win a championship now. Well, KD and win another championship. So that's why they're on the Heat's list because they know we're capable of putting together a contender. And those guys might think, hey, if they made the NBA Finals without me, maybe they could win the whole thing with me. The problem is, though, the Heat didn't have the assets to acquire those guys. Well, I guess they did for Dame, but Joe Cronin was petty. It's like, I don't know. There's so many variables here. Because then the Heat didn't want Bradley Beal because they could have got him. KD sounds like maybe he did prefer the Suns. So now I don't know what the hell is going on anymore at all. That's what this offseason has done to me. I like to call this the duality of a Heat fan because I feel like you can make a great argument to blame the front office for the way things going, but you can make a great argument to blame other people or just blame bad luck. That's why I kind of like to call myself a realist because I could see every perspective. I really do. Because I'll be honest with you, things aren't looking good right now. It's really looking like the only chances of not running it back is what? I don't know. If you're talking Wales, is there Lauri Markkanen? Is he available? I don't think the Heat have the assets to get that done. Is it Trae Young? Maybe the Heat have the assets to get that done, but is he even on the market? Do you trade Tyler Herro for a couple of ancillary rotation pieces that fit better? The one I keep coming to is Dorian Finney-Smith and Dennis Schroeder. Two guys that are solid defensively. Schroeder's a pest on that end. Dorian Finney-Smith is a very switchable defender, and they're both kind of on expiring contracts. So do the Nets want to take on him or take on Tyler Herro and send them out to get some value for those expirings? Because Schroeder is expiring, and Dorian Finney-Smith has a player option next season, which he might opt out of. But then do the Nets want Tyler Herro's massive contract? Nobody else does. So I don't know what the hell the thing is as a Heat fan. But anyway, I kind of want to transition from the Caleb Martin topic, and we'll talk about DeMar DeRozan a little bit because that kind of relates to everything that we've been saying. So officially, DeMar DeRozan is going to the Sacramento Kings. They send off the salary of Harrison Barnes to the Spurs. And then the Bulls, they get a couple of second-round picks and Chris Duarte. The holdup there was basically every team that was kind of interested in DeMar was waiting to find a third team to take on some salary because like the Heat, the Kings had no cap space, but they were able to send Harrison Barnes to the Spurs. The part about that stands out to me is, damn, nobody wants Tyler Herro because The Spurs, a young team, they could have used a guard like Tyler Herro, somebody that could score, throw a little bit of lobs with Victor Wembanyama, and they just truly do not want that contract. That's all that tells me. That's clear as day. And I know they're not the only one, because the Spurs chose to take on the smaller, shorter Harrison Barnes contract over the massive Tyler Herro deal, which that tells me it's going to be very, very hard to trade Tyler Herro. I mean, I made a video a couple months ago saying the harsh truth about Tyler Herro, and it was talking about how I think he's a negative asset. That's the harsh truth, because there's a lot of Heat fans that's out here saying, oh, I blame the front office. They value Tyler Herro too much. I don't think that's it. I think at one point they did. That's why they paid him. But at this point, I just don't think anybody wants him, because the only way that he can make some moves this offseason is if they offload Tyler Herro and open up that cap space. Obviously, the Spurs didn't want him. The Magic was an option. I think he would have fit nice there, but they decided to go after KCP and a bunch of other guys. I thought the Pistons would have been a nice fit because their guard rotation was Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Ron Holland. None of those guys can shoot. I think Tyler Herro would have fit great there as a shooter from the guard spot, a guy that has some experience and fits the age timeline that they're on. But they just signed Malik Beasley. They already traded for Tim Hardaway Jr. earlier this summer. So they very clearly rather have those guys over Herro, because Tim Hardaway's an expiring contract. Malik Beasley, they just signed for cheap, like $6-7 million, something like that. So they don't want Tyler Herro's contract. The only other team with cap space right now is like the Utah Jazz. At one point, we know Danny Ainge wanted Tyler Herro. That was before the draft. Would he still want Tyler Herro now? I make all the jokes about him being white, so maybe they want him for that. Maybe. That's like the only reason I could think why they would want him, because they still have Keontae George. They still have Colin Sexton. They just drafted Isaiah Collier. So do they even want Tyler Herro? Do they want to take on that massive contract? I don't know. And I think that he kind of have to trade Tyler at this point. It's very clearly run its course. He needs to change the scenery. He's on Twitter liking tweets saying, free Tyler Herro from this toxic fan base at Miami Heat. That's clear as day. Demanding a trade in my book. Liking a tweet, telling the team to release you. I think that he got to move on from him. But it sounds like nobody wants him. Like I said, I'm hoping that Nets deal, they can work out something with the Nets, because that team is obviously trying to blow it up. But do they look at Tyler Herro as getting an asset for a couple expirings? Or do they look at Tyler Herro as, damn, we taking on a lot of money? I don't want that. Even if you were talking about doing a sign and trade for DeMar straight with the Bulls very clearly didn't want Tyler Herro, because I'm sure that's a topic that was discussed, because they don't want to take on that long-term money, because they'd be over the first apron to suck. That's why they only took on Chris Duarte, who's not making a lot of money. Also, does Herro fit with that Bulls team anyways? Josh Giddey, Kobe White, two ball-dominant players there. I don't see a way that Caleb Martin is... or Caleb Martin. I'm looking at my notes here, right, Caleb? I don't see a way that Tyler Herro is moved, even though, again, the duality of Heat fan. On one side, I don't see how Tyler Herro is traded this offseason. I don't see a deal that's reasonable. On the other hand, Tyler Herro needs to be gone. How? I can't explain it, but that's not my job. That's the front office's to do. I guess that's pretty much it as far as the DeMar trade. I do like that for the Kings. People are saying the spacing is going to suck. I've talked about with the Heat, DeMar shot 3 threes a game last year. That's enough to keep the defense honest. I know Sabonis is not really a spacer, but he's just that offense is going to be so great now. It really is. De'Aaron Fox shot like 38% from 3 last year on high volume, so he really picked it up in that regard. They have a couple of great scorers to go to late in games. 2 of the clutchest players in the entire league, in Fox and DeMar. It's going to be very hard to win close games versus that team. The very young team gets a little bit more experience with DeMar DeRozan, although DeMar has never really been far in the playoffs or anything like that. Did he make a conference finals to go against LeBronto? I don't remember, but still, he's obviously a true vet in this league. I think it's a great pickup for the Kings. I mean, they'll probably still finish, somewhere 7th, 8th. I don't know. I'd really have to think about it, but I think it's a great pickup from them. And from there, where do the Miami Heat go? Because obviously he was an option, gone. I know some Heat fans had a hope for Paul George, gone. I had hope for LeBron months ago. They drafted Bronny, got J.J. Redick. LeBron obviously re-signed. He's gone. I mean, who else is there out there? Brandon Ingram, he's a guy that might be able to get for cheap. Doesn't sound like the Heat are particularly interested because of the injury history. I get it. But I do think Brandon Ingram's an expiring contract. Let me actually look that up, because if you can at least get off of Tyler Herro, like I said, would the Pelicans want Tyler Herro? I have no idea, but I'm praying they do. And then you could go ahead and bring on in Brandon Ingram, who, yes, isn't expiring, $36 million. So best case scenario, you get Brandon Ingram. He works out, plays amazing. You win a championship with him, re-sign him to a ton of money. He still is very young. He's only 27 years old. Worst case scenario, you bring him in, he sucks. You lose him next offseason. You clear up all that cap space. That's worst case scenario. Because right now, Tyler Herro is not an asset. But instead of keep talking about Tyler Herro, is there anyone else? Trae Young. I like him. We talked about Larry Markkinen. I don't know. I don't know. I don't see it. I'm trying to think of any scenario in which the Heat don't run it back next season. Run it back, but worse, and I don't see it. We can transition into Summer League, because maybe one way where the Heat get better is through some of these rookies. We did see only one game of film so far. I will say, not judging based off the one, Summer League game, I did like the offseason they had in terms of bringing in some rookies. Obviously, Kel'el Ware is a great fit when you talk about a big that can rebound and play defense. I don't like when people say, oh, he's a stretch the floor big. He's not. He shot 1 3 a game in college. That tells me that the potential is there. Now, he shot 43% on one attempt in college, so he's a guy that might be able to come to the league and do the same thing. So if you count 1 3 a game as a stretch the floor big, fine. I don't know if that's enough for the defense to go out there and guard him, but we'll see. But he still is a very good, he's a true 7-footer. He can play some defense. I like that. Pelle Larsson is a guy that looks like he can contribute right away. Zion Pullen, true point guard. I've said he's a better passing Gabe Vincent or a bigger Tyus Jones. Kashad Johnson, I've said he's PJ Tucker with Derrick Jones Jr. athleticism. So I do really like these guys. In the first game of Summer League, everyone was pretty terrible. They obviously lost by almost 40 points. Nobody shot the ball well at all, but except for Cole Swider. Swider was like 4 of 8 from 3. Shout out to the amazing Swider, man. With him, by the way, they said that he shot 47% from 3 in the G League last year on 10 attempts. I couldn't believe that when I heard that during the game. That sounds unheard of. So if you're asking why he hasn't been called up yet, it's because he's got a lot of defensive concerns through one game in Summer League. I can't really tell if he's improved on that end. They actually started him at point guard, which is interesting, because if he can develop into a playmaker with that jump shot, maybe he has a real spot, as a rotation spot in this league. But those 3-point numbers are too gaudy to ignore. So I do get why the Heat are keeping him around. And through one game, he shot well. Everyone else obviously offensively wasn't great. But the positives, though, Kel'el Ware, he did have a nice stretch in the second half where he was getting some buckets, had some nice touches inside. Did hit a longer mid-range shot that looked very silky smooth. You like to see that from him. But defensively, he was a monster. Finished with 5 blocks on the night. I felt like he was rotating very well. He was holding his own on his own man very well. He was playing with great energy and effort, blocking shots, sprinting back on the offensive end. I love what I saw from him as far as motor, but more importantly, defensive IQ. Because a lot of 7-footers you could say, oh, they could block shots because they're tall. That's not the case. You have to know how to rotate. You have to know when to leave your man, when not to leave your man. You have to have the timing to block the shot, so it's not goaltending, to pin it off the backboard. And he did a lot of that yesterday. So I love what I saw from him as far as the defensive IQ. Everyone else, Pelle Larsson, I had been saying that boy is the Tyler Herro mold. We saw that yesterday. He was letting those things fly. Only finished with 8 shots. I think he was 2 of 8. But they were almost all of them in the first quarter. So he didn't shoot great, but I do like the confidence. So if you want to say some positives, sure, the kid had some confidence. And he took a wide array of shots. So there was some offensive versatility there. Who else? Kashad Johnson didn't shoot great either. But he's a boys, you didn't get to see the full athleticism in the open lane. But he had some really nice rebounds, some nice blocks, had 3 offensive rebounds, was chasing his own shot. He showed a lot of energy out there, and I like how they used him. He did get a lot of corner threes up. I think he shot 4 of them. And we know the way the Heat like to run their offense. Put a guy in the corner for that spacing. Allow those driving lanes for Jimmy and Bam. We saw them do that masterfully with PJ Tucker. So I like seeing that's how they plan on using Kashad Johnson too. Didn't knock him down yesterday. But in college, at his last year at Arizona, he was very, very good in the corners. That's how they used him in game 1. He just didn't knock him down in that particular game. Zion Pullen didn't do too much there. but I felt like he made some nice reads. And overall, I like him as a true point guard. I mean, the guy had a 5-to-1 assist to turnover ratio as a senior at Florida. That's a big school. You don't accidentally walk into a 5-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. That's amazing. So although he came off the bench yesterday, so he didn't get a ton of run. Didn't shoot well, obviously, but I like what he brings to the table as far as a point guard. We'll see what happens in the next game. Alondes Williams was 0 for 9 yesterday. He's the guy you're sort of looking to as your bucket getter. Didn't do that yesterday. But we know through the G League, he's had a couple of monster scoring performances, a 45-point game, a 55-point game. He's certainly capable. I was hoping to see him come in Summer League and dominate because he's sort of a Summer League vet at this point, and that's kind of where you start to see these guys set themselves apart from the rest of the crowd. Remember that Summer League that Max Strus had where he dominated? You knew that boy was ready for big time, and sure enough, he had a really big season for the Miami Heat whenever that was, 22 or 2023. So we'll see what happens in Game 2. They do play that later today. I might have a reaction video out to that. I'll see. I might be busy. I'll definitely be watching the game, whether live or after the fact, but it might not make sense to do a post-game 6 hours after the game ended because I'm not sure anyone would watch that. But anyways, I think that's kind of all I got to say for this podcast. So if you made it to this point of the podcast, you a real one, and I do appreciate you. So go ahead and comment down below. What can we get you to say? Comment down below your score prediction for tonight's game versus I think they play the Kings today in the Summer League. And whoever the closest prediction is, I'll shout you out in the next podcast next week. How about that? Because I'll try to do these long form, no edit podcasts once a week. And if you're watching this after the game, I guess there's no way to really prove. Okay, this is going to be uploaded by 10:30 a.m. I think the game's at 4:30. You have 5 hours to get your comments in. Anyways, like the video, subscribe. I'll see y'all next time. Peace out.
Look, pull up in your city trying to get that dead face. Do it on my own, I don't need no dead weight. Had to kill him off, yeah, I need a head space. You know this homegrown bitch don't offend me.